Against? Carried. Okay. Thank you, Claire and Dean. We move on to item 10, which is entitled the implications of removal of regional fuel tax. We have a number of personnel here to do this in addition to the Chief Executive, Mark Lang, Nikki Lucas and Murray Burt, and we also, as I alluded to earlier, we have Mark Darrow, the Deputy Chair of the AT Board here. Welcome, Mark. And basically, the main purpose of this item is really just to give us a little bit of an insight into the implications of the removal of the fuel tax and to endorse the listed allocation priorities for the remaining RFT and the review of programs that will follow as a result. So the recommendations up there, they look like one of my old high school English essays with all the corrections in red from the teacher, but really what the red does, and I might just ask Barry just quickly to refer to it, is just really to try and make things clearer so that we're communicating very clearly what the situation is with the regional fuel tax and how we'll be proceeding in terms of prioritisation. So it really serves the end of trying to spell out clearly for the public record where we sit, but I'll just let Barry perhaps just briefly speak to that.
Thank you, Chair. You covered that pretty well. There are a couple of other bits in there, which is just to make sure that the recommendations here come in with the options that are covered under the legislation, that we are aligned with what the regional fuel tax can and can't do, and there are some commitments in there. So it's really just to bring that alignment around.
Point of clarification, could we just scroll down? Thank you.
Okay, so with that said, over to the team for the presentation.
Thank you, committee, and can I acknowledge Mark? It's really pleasing to have you here too, so as Deputy Chair, and the team for the hard work that's been going in over the last several weeks. We all saw this coming. It was very clearly part of the Coalition's 100-day plan. And so we're also grateful to working with the Auckland Council Finance team because we've been able to manage some of the impact of removal of the regional fuel tax in the way that we've planned for the next LTP. So the way that we have positioned this is acknowledging it removes approximately $1.2 billion from the capital program. The way that we've approached this is effectively taking a staged approach. So the first stage, and you'll have seen in those recommendations or proposed resolutions, that we continue where regional fuel tax is funding, and remember the regional fuel tax only funds a portion of each project, it's part of the funding stack. So you'll have local share from rates, you'll have money from the National Land Transport Fund, and you'll have regional fuel tax, or it could be from another source, Crown Infrastructure Partners, to make up the total funding stack to deliver a project. Where a project has got regional fuel tax attached to it, we'll take, with all of those projects in mind, we're clear that legislation provides for us to continue Eastern Busway, and the electric trains and associated stabling yards. The legislation also provides for us, by definition, to take that portion of regional fuel tax that was allocated to public transport operating costs and continue to use that funding in that way. Then the balance of it is on CRL Day 1 and road improvement projects. Of the $360 million that's available, there's not going to be much left to support what would have otherwise been done through those portions of the program. So what that leaves us with is we've got a capital program that's now $1.2 billion less. We're looking back through the whole capital program and identifying those that have the greatest strategic alignment and the best BCRs, and we're differentiating them from those that have lesser strategic alignment and lower BCRs, and we will have to reallocate capital from the lower group back into the higher group. And some of those might be RFT funded projects and some of them might not. But we need time to do that and to do it thoroughly and properly. We will review and we will adjust on the go because we can't sterilise delivery of our whole capital program. That would also be a perverse outcome. So we'll be reallocating capital from one to the other where it makes best sense to do so. The impact, therefore, and we need to understand that the impact of removing the regional fuel tax may not be limited to those projects that were being funded by it, where those projects under the formerly funded by regional fuel tax have a higher BCR and better strategic alignment, then it may be a non-RFT funded project that gets de-scoped, delayed or stopped. I'll give you one example. And that example relates to the charging infrastructure for the electric ferries. That was previously funded by the RFT. It's not provided for in the changed legislation, but that project deeply aligns with a whole lot of outcomes we're committed to. To stop it would mean that we'd not be able to deliver a renewed ferry fleet. And that would have serious implications because the existing ferry fleet is aged and needs replacing, and we're also looking to change the ferry operating model that allows us to own the fleet and contract in the service provider as opposed to the service provider owning the fleet and providing the service. So that would be an example where we would need to find currently circa, I think it's 20 million or thereabouts, 15 or 20 million from another project allocated to that so we can keep going. Okay, so there is that complexity. We need time to work through it and work through it clearly and transparently and bring that through to the board. But what we're seeking today from you is not project approval. We're seeking from you approval in principle as proposed. Okay, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Mark.
Thanks, Dean. I think you probably covered the key messages in the presentation, but for completeness, if you're happy, Chair, I'll run through the slides because I know this is a complex issue. And if I can make this work, there we go. So just the background, and this page here is listing to when it was actually enacted. There was a thing called an order in council that was passed by government. So while councillors were the ones that sort of led with the chin to get regional fuel tax put in place, it required the enacting legislation. And it essentially split out these 14, they were called projects, but essentially buckets of what projects were eligible for RFT, and it was very prescriptive underneath, and it literally lists out what is or isn't eligible. And they have actually been refreshed, since the RFT was introduced as recently as I think it was May 2023. Essentially what the legislation is that they're passing, it doesn't replace, I don't think, I'm not a lawyer, the previous piece, but it repeals, it sits alongside this and basically says the only buckets on this list that you're allowed to spend money on going forward for it is projects 4, 6 and 12 that are on that list. So the Eastern Busway, electric train stabling and the road corridor improvements. All of the rest of them we're effectively not allowed to spend RFT on. This slide gives a little bit more background. Just a reminder, so if you think of the scheme as it was essentially over 10 years going to raise about $150 million a year, so 1.5 billion ending in 2028. So it's coming off 4 years early. So 150 mil, 4 years, 600 mil less into council coffers. And if you assumed that money would have attracted match co-funding, you're talking about a $1.2 billion gap if the co-funding falls away as well. Basically what I just said there, so these are the projects we can spend the money on going forward, and there are some specific things actually called out under the Eastern Busway and the things like the trains that actually, and we'll get onto this in a minute, we could actually still within there choose to spend some money on actually running services within those projects. This slide gives you just a a pie chart of how it's historically been spent, and you can see largely on public transport corridor improvements, road safety and other roading improvements with a small piece on active modes. The recommendation, or initial implications of the removal here and how far it will go, setting out that, and this is something just need to remind people, is obviously the money was collecting about 150 a year, but there's always a lag between collection and spending. We couldn't spend it in advance. So we built up about 360 million, we're thinking around 30 June, of unspent reserves, and in terms of how it could be allocated, 210 to Eastern Busway, 75 to the trains and stabling, and that leaves around, and we'll need to work through the exact numbers, but around 75 mil, and these are some of the options of where it could be spent. So within the electric trains and stabling bucket, there is actually the ability to spend it on other CRL day one type projects. So if you think of the developments outside the station on Wellesley Street, and also part of the development around what we call Project K up around the K Road station. So the sort of things that are required for CRL day one opening. Ability to also fund some of the new services on Eastern Busway and the new trains, which are obviously funded when CRL goes live, and then that last bucket being road corridor improvements. Very specific list. Yes, no, it's a good point. There's no way that 75 will fund everything there, so there's going to be some choices about how it gets allocated across those other bits, and obviously you could spread it very thinly, or you could allocate more into certain buckets, but and that's why we'll come back to the prioritisation piece and the choices around it. Another way to think of this, these are the projects that are eligible to have it allocated to it going forward. Is probably the best way to think. It doesn't mean we have to allocate. And obviously under road corridor improvements, some very specific projects listed, and then on the very last bit, also road seal extensions was explicitly called out, which now is effectively a subset of our unsealed roading program. So think of it more as there's obviously a number of smaller projects in there that would be eligible. Implications, and Dean's largely touched on this already, but obviously our funding comes from a huge number of sources, both central and local government. The long-term plan, and just a reminder, when it was released, we made a very late change, and we didn't actually flow totally through, so we didn't go and reprioritise the 14 billion program in there, but had a specific call out that with the regional fuel tax coming off, that program would probably need to drop about 600 mil. The long-term plan had already assumed it came off in 2 years' time, but not immediately. So this then necessitates, and that's why the last piece was critically included in the long-term plan. It's going to require this detailed reprioritisation, but critically also we need to take into account this latest government policy statement that's come out, which could arguably have even bigger impacts in terms of, once we work through the detail, in terms of what it might mean for what does get priority and co-funding from central government going forward. So based on that, and again, Dean's touched on this, but in terms of slide, it effectively leaves us with two options. Do we just look at, when we look at a reprioritisation, RFT funded projects, or the entire capital program, and our strong preference is to do the second. So we actually, and I guess if I stand back in layman's terms, we don't want the funding to be the tail that wags the dog. We should actually step back and go, well, this is the amount of money that's now available. What are the highest priority things that we should be doing as a council family? And take into account, with what is actually eligible for co-funding going forward. So the initial proposals, and for completeness, we do recommend continuing to spend the money on Eastern Busway. We have done a piece of work. I won't share the numbers because it's obviously commercially sensitive, but if we were to go and break that contract, there is an exorbitant cost of lost money. And also, again, you're building a key strategic asset out to the east, which doesn't have decent public transport options, and it effectively gives them the equivalent of the Northern Busway. Train stabling, obviously the trains are currently in construction in Mexico, and we need the stabling for them. There's nowhere to house them if we don't build it. So to us, they're critical investments that just need to continue. Otherwise, our crown jewel CRL will be built, and we won't have the trains to run when it opens. So those are the other key bits. The other piece then around these CRO roadside projects, and I listed a couple of examples there. We see these as critical. Again, if you think about pedestrians or commuters coming out of those stations, walking out onto a street that doesn't have wider footpaths, etc., there's safety issues, and it's just about traffic flow and actually optimising those assets. And to go back and retrofit those types of things post-opening doesn't seem like a smart idea. And then that leaves us with the choice around, how some of these other amounts of money could be spent. And this was talking specifically about the projects, in terms of where remainder could go. But to the point, there's the amount left would be a small contribution to some potential projects and road and corridor improvements. Sorry, I just jumped too far. I'll just come back and, sorry, I just jumped about 3 slides. And then Dean's touched on, there are certain other things that are contractually committed that aren't eligible for RFT, but we want to continue the landslide charging infrastructure. And then the Wainui one, just as a reminder, that's that big development, the Mildale one up at Wainui, which council actually led, and effectively our part was putting in some connecting roads and a bridge. But obviously that's all wrapped up in a bigger commercial arrangement. So again, we're saying that needs to continue, and there's some housing development around Red Hill. But just calling out some specific examples, so we're thinking those pieces obviously need to continue the funding. This is the cut down list of things that then are saying are no longer eligible for RFT. And again, as part of this reprioritisation exercise, we will be very careful about, looking at where these projects are in terms of whether they're in design or construction yet, or getting close to construction, and being very prudent about doing that prioritisation exercise prior to making any further big decisions around projects that are eligible for RFT. The OPEX piece, and we just thought we'd put this in as a separate slide later on, and this is the point that there is a choice in here to actually fund if we want to choose to, and we'll work through this with the council finance team, and as part of the LTP, would it make more sense to actually allocate some of this money into some of the funding of some of these key services when they go live, just because of the financial constraints on council at the moment? One to be worked through. So basically that brings us to, and this is sort of a slightly cut down version of the other recommendation you saw, but the key is what we're recommending here is that the Transport and Infrastructure Committee effectively note what we've said here, critically endorse that we continue to invest the money in Eastern Busway, electric trains and stabling, and then endorses, and 5, obviously the detail needs to be worked through, but that the remaining allocation sits across these CRL day 1 projects, road corridor projects, and or OPEX for Eastern Busway electric train. So those are the bits that are still eligible, but clearly it will be a small wedge of helping contribute to the cost of those things. And obviously we're going to undertake this reprioritisation very quickly, which we will want to be taking into account as we work through it, the implications from the GPS, albeit that's only draft at the moment and needs to be worked through. So those are the slides. Hopefully that's helpful, and happy to take any questions.
All right, thanks, gentlemen. So quite a complex business there to try and come to terms with. Do we have any questions people may have on the regional fuel tax? Mayor.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. Firstly, you've asked us, you've got 2 potential approaches. I would support the second scenario, which reprioritises the whole program on the basis that projects be prioritised on their merits, not their funding sources. I think we'd done that a few years ago. We might not have spent so much money. Secondly, the electric ferry charging, which you raised as one that should be done. I was actually approached by a company yesterday who might be interested in putting that up and paying it off over a period of time. So perhaps you might like to contact me about that and take that further. The recommendation says that to do the Eastern Busway, it just says we may do the Eastern Busway. It doesn't say we must do the Eastern Busway. And I'm mindful that the councillors from Howick don't like buses, and we've all had plenty of lessons from Councillor Williamson, who has videos of people on empty buses. He's asked me to watch 30 minutes of nothing happening, which I have resisted. And so, and I don't want to upset my councillors from that area there, so I'd like you to consider whether we do actually. And in terms of pulling out of things, just to do something because of the cost of pulling out of it is not a reason to do something. It's a reason for reducing the cost of pulling out of it by pointing out to those people they never get near the work again. But so I'm not suggesting that we do or don't, but I'm just suggesting there are people who regularly attend and speak a lot here who don't like buses out in Howick. And these people are quite close to the government, so perhaps I'm missing something. You might like to consider that, or at least I'd ask you to consider that. And lastly, we spoke yesterday about when we stop things, which is when they are, before they're started, not just when they're designed and committed. And we haven't started Great North Road, and as the one person in the council who lives in Great North Road, I think it's a waste of money. So please note those things. That's what I'm asking you to do. Could you mind noting those things? Thank you very much.
Okay, so you've taken that on board. Councillor Ferry, followed by Councillor Walker.
Thank you. Point of clarification, start with due respect to Mr. Mayor, you don't live on Great North Road, and we did have a presentation earlier from two people who walk their children along Great North Road, and it's a shame that you weren't here for that. I'm sure for a good reason, but I think that would have been helpful. The question I have, though, is actually quite similar to the direction the Mayor was going in before that. We're being asked here to endorse the continuation of two mega million-dollar projects on a covering report. So we actually haven't really had any advice on endorsing the continuation of those two projects beyond what you've just presented to us. And noting that one of them is $210 million and highly controversial in terms of at the local level, I would prefer to have much more advice and more of a conversation before I'm voting to endorse the Eastern Busway stages 2 and 3. I think the electric trains and stabling, the trains are on their way effectively. That one makes sense to me. But the other one I think deserves a lot more robust advice. So when is that coming, please?
Okay. So the intention wasn't to bring any more robust or deeper information on either Eastern Busway or CRL investments, but the board has considered the cost of stopping Eastern Busway. The last review in December or January of this year showed that if we stopped it today and did not start it again, the minimum cost of doing so would be $50 million. If we stopped, paused and then remobilised, you'd have no change out of $75 million. Depending on how long you stopped for. So look, those are contracts that are in full flight right now, all of those contracts. I personally think, and I've gone out there, I think there's a lot of community support for the Eastern Busways. So I know there is some contention with some individuals, but to be honest, I don't think maybe we're reading the room at all well if we think that there's a lot of opposition to the Eastern Busway out in the east part of Auckland.
Follow up. So I think you said the cost of stopping in terms of the contractual commitments was 15 million or 75 million? 50, right. That's what I wanted to check, yeah. Is that smaller than 210 million?
Sorry, can I just on Eastern Busway, and this is again, it's when we're just looking at the funding slice of these projects, just a reminder, Eastern Busway, and depending on whether you take retrospective land, call it 1.4 billion as a project. What we've negotiated over the last few years is that project is being 51% funded by Waikato. There's an extra 200 million the Crown's tipping in, which was originally earmarked, I think, for the cycling bridge. So government's paying more than its fair share of that project. So what we're debating here is for the local share component, which effectively councils or AT have committed to, is does that come out of general rates or still an allocation of the regional fuel tax, which is it's eligible to the way that this repealing legislation has been passed, because there's only 3 buckets now we can point it into. So again, sorry, and I know that's complex, but it's, if you think at a project level, it's a very big, significant project that's substantially government funded, and it's just this choice around if we want to break it, it's a national conversation in some ways, given the funding mix, but our recommendation is that we would still, from the unspent balance that's gone into council's bank accounts, direct it in there, because it's the biggest thing we're doing, to fund our share of it. I don't know if that helps, but we've got the money sitting in the bank account. Why wouldn't we put it in there?
We might not choose to prioritise that one, but just one last question, which is around the fact that the RFT went through quite an extensive consultation process prior to my time around this table. We made commitments to the community through that consultation process about precisely what it would be spent on, and we are now effectively being forced to change those commitments by central government. Does that leave us open? The fact that we consulted on, we're going to spend it on X, and now acknowledging, it's not necessarily at our choosing that we're changing it or that we're stopping it early. What are the legal implications for us in terms of the community's expectations and whether we're honouring them?
The government has the power to change the legislation and direct how that regional fuel tax is applied. So we've sought to reflect that. It can be spent in those 3 areas we've identified. As for letting down expectations where those have been built up with our communities, that's a matter for those communities to raise with their local MPs, but this is effectively legislated. We're looking and giving advice as to how best to respond to it.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker online.
Yeah, hi there, Mr. Chair. Just have a question around these projects, completion of the Eastern Busway, electric trains, and stabling. Are those projects already contracted in the sense that we know what they're going to be spent on and where?
Correct. We have signed contracts. All of those projects are deep into delivery and contingent on getting them finished just so we can deliver the service. So if for example, the choice was made not to fund the electric trains and stabling yards, you would not be delivering CRL on day one. You'd be walking it. If you chose to not finish Eastern Busway, then you wouldn't be providing public transport services out into the east in the same way that the north and the northwest enjoy. So I think it's very blunt decision that you all have to make. I don't know how I can put it more succinctly.
Okay, just on the electric trains and the stabling, is there some detail that I could receive just around that? I'm sure it may have been publicised, the number of trains and just some details around the stabling, where that is, what it amounts to.
We can provide another update. We'll do it by way of memo, but there's a lot of information in the public space about trains, train stations, locations, timing, but if that's going to help, then we'll provide that information.
Okay, and the other quick question I've got just goes to the issue that the Mayor raised around electric ferries. That's certainly something I take an interest in. In an instance where we might be looking at operational funding, because there could be another party that could supply the ferry and fund it via capital, is there any prospect of using any operational expenditure through this fund for electric ferries?
The short answer is no.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Walker. The next question is Councillors Darby, Hills, Henderson, Lee, Newman, and councillor Bartley.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Dean. Mark, good to see you, and Mark and the other Mark. Just in terms of the balance, now Matakana Link Road is taken care of anyway. It's on the list, but it's already been taken care of. Lincoln Road, sorry, is out because that didn't make the draft LTP cut. So in terms of the road corridor improvements, we're down to the Rural Unsealed Road Program, Lake Road, Glenvar, and the Smales Ellens Road improvements as well. What is the quantum of RFT, Mark, if you have this in your head, what is the RFT quantum that's going into, what is that, 1, 2, 3, 4 areas, in which is potentially live for road corridor improvements allocation?
Sorry, and this is where it becomes a bit of a mental arithmetic, because it actually depends on how much gets allocated to the CRL Day 1 projects, in terms of Wellesley Street and the piece around Pitt Street. But essentially there's a 75 mil pot there to allocate across those buckets. Yeah, and again, that's why I think it's really important that we don't, and I said don't let the tail wag the dog on the funding. We know they're eligible for funding, and we need to go away and do that prioritisation and look at what are the best options around it, but also then start bringing in that new GPS lens of are they still eligible for co-funding or not, those projects. And that's the piece of work we're going to have to do in the next few months.
Can I ask that because members of the government in the House have spoken in their speeches about the likelihood of Lake Road and Glenvar, those particular ones, being eligible by their decisions for funding. But what I'm reading is what's left won't go that far. It won't even touch the sides.
Correct. And in some projects, RFT only made up, I'm trying to remember, it was somewhere between about 10 or 50% of the projects. There was always, all of these projects was, apart from probably the unsealed or road extensions piece, was always subject to getting co-funding from government from other pots. That's why the co-funding piece becomes so critical. So they always generally had either developer contributions, regional fuel tax and co-funding. And that's why we've got to kind of bring it becomes quite a complex kind of process to bring together the available funding and then against the prioritisation of the projects. And I suppose if I just step back for a second, this effectively happens, irrespective of the RFT being cut, this effectively, we go through this every 3 years when the GPS comes out in terms of new government priorities for the next 3 year period.
Just a couple more questions, Chair. Is there likely to be, I'm sure it hasn't been undertaken yet, but or will you undertake some modelling on the impacts of the expunging of the regional fuel tax? So on general traffic congestion, public transport patronage uptake, cycling counts, safety, deaths, serious injuries. Is there likely to be, on Auckland Transport's part, a good, strong look at what the actual implications are, you know, the outcomes? Because my read of it is the RFT was making a positive contribution in all those areas, and now I'm thinking it can't help but have a negative effect on deaths and serious injuries, public transport patronage, general congestion, etc. Is work likely to be undertaken to model the impact, the effects? And then one more question, Chair.
Look, we will do our best to get all of those outcomes and consider the alignment of the project with those strategic outcomes and the BCR. So we will do both. What worries me from an Auckland Transport and an investment perspective for delivering outcomes for Auckland, capital project outcomes, is if we go too far back and rethink all of the capital program, we could spend months in this, we could put a lot of things on pause and put a lot of projects at risk. So the approach will be nuanced. It will rapidly, the intention of a rapid review is to identify what are the projects most challenged against strategic outcomes and BCR, and if we agree that that is the case, then we will look to reallocate capital to the higher ones that are under funding threat so they can continue going, so we don't lose momentum. And then we'll work in towards the middle. So it is a nuanced, rapid review. Otherwise, we could spend a lot of time reviewing a potentially $14 billion capital program with GPS, regional fuel tax and LTP moving parts, and we could almost freeze on the spot. We can't afford to do that. So yes, we do want to review against those criteria, Councillor, but we're going to do some of this very rapidly because we need to keep progress as well. It's
Okay, thank you.
pragmatic.
And I'll just come back, you mentioned the word rapid, and in motion F, the recommendation F, there's the addition of some words there, report the findings of the rapid review. There's no expectation on your part, Dean, to be reporting information that puts before this committee or any council committee the opportunity to be pick and mixing projects. You're reporting findings at a high level in terms of the big budget buckets. Is that what we're expecting to see come back when we highlight reporting the findings to this committee?
Yeah, yes, I would have thought so. I mean, your trust in Auckland Transport is we deliver within a capital program, and we deliver within a broad capital budget, and we deliver within programs of work, and you set those out. You set them out in terms of renewals and maintenance. You set them out in terms of public transport and public transport services. So our commitment to you is, of course, we're going to be sensible about any decisions made. We commit to living within our budget, because we don't have any authority to do otherwise, and we commit to living within, in investment terms, those broad program budgets. And we're saying we will now be wise around how we reallocate capital to ensure that we can keep going against those projects who are at best alignment. I don't think this committee wants to get into individual project approvals. That's the role of the AT board. Yours is to set the parameters. So we will bring back feedback on how we're going, of course, but we weren't going to bring back individual projects for approval.
Councillor Hills?
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. I guess first question on that, we chose, as in we as a council with the AT, chose the projects that went in. Now we're being told. Is that correct? The last government allowed us to choose the priorities. Obviously they agreed with them through Parliament, but I remember that we chose the priorities. Now we've got a government. Is that correct? Is that how I've seen it?
I think that's a similar question to Councillor Ferry. Effectively, the government of the day has the power through legislation to reset the priorities,
Okay.
and that is what they've done, and we are giving you advice on how best to respond to that.
And I guess with all due respect, your answers are correct of what we should do, but we had the funding, and so, this is the government choosing to rip this funding away. The $14 billion central thing, sorry, the choice, I guess, through the LTP, that's obviously going to be auto reduced to 13.4, or is that actually, would we use the Wakukutahi funding too?
Per the LTP, so we put in a placeholder saying that it's coming down to 13.4, and that's the piece we'll need to work through initially. The key piece, though, is, bear in mind the 14 bill is a 10-year number.
Yeah.
Now that we're getting the GPS, that's only a 3-year view. So all the action for us really is in those first 3 years initially to try and work out alignment of priorities now between the regional fuel tax coming out, the pivots and the GPS, which we weren't planning to really go into today, unless you want to make any high-level comments, but it's what's the available funding in the first 3 years and how might that money be prioritised within the broader context of those long-term strategic 10-year outcomes.
Thank you. The original plan of projects we consulted on was 4.2 billion, I think I remember. So if you extrapolate that, it's about 1.8. Is it about $1.8 billion worth, $1.7 billion worth of projects? Because if you include the DCs and the borrowing, that is what is missing now, essentially.
Not necessarily. I mean, there's different ways you can think about it, but the way I'd simplistically think about it is there's $600 million now that was going to turn up in council's bank account that's not. over 4 years.
Yeah.
And then you can sort of think about co-funding, because co-funding, we can still advocate for it through other means and things like that. So it's not as black and white as.
And I know it reduces our borrowing capacity by another 400 million a year. Does that affect you guys directly, or is that our overall capital budget that we end up allocating to you that affects it? Does that automatically fall to AT? Or is it something we do on the accounting side?
The 600s come directly out of AT's capital program.
Yeah, but I understand the 600 plus 600 Waka Kotahi actually affected our debt to revenue, which allowed us to borrow more for capital. Does that affect you guys directly, or the whole council family first, and then it affects you later?
Sorry, different question. None of the council finance team here, but sorry, when the council finance team rolled up the LTP, they had taken into account regional fuel tax potentially coming off in 2 years' time.
Okay.
So the only late adjustment was they've adjusted for it coming off 2 years earlier. So they effectively have washed that right through, considered it as part of the debt to revenue ratios, etc. And what's gone out, noting though that the piece we haven't done yet has gone back and said, well, out of AT's 14 billion, what does it look like when you take it out?
Okay.
That's the bit that's missing.
The decisions we're making today, the quantum, and I know you've tried to answer that before, the road corridor improvement projects really aren't there. It is, I know you're trying to do your best, but I can't see when some of those projects are 50, 80 million and you've got 75 just for the wash up of the CRL works. You can't honestly be, if we want to be honest to the public, those road corridor improvement projects are not really going to be funded from this.
If they were to proceed, they'd probably end up with a small RFT allocation.
And because this was a late report and I don't know when it will be the next opportunity to discuss this in the open, what do you predict happens to all the other projects? I know you've said you're going to reorder them, but the government's going to expect us to do those significant growth related projects, and then we've got heaps of there's dynamic lanes in there which I assume affect the mayor's priorities on that was funding that, and also all the city centre bus, the cross street, it's not just safety and cycleways like the minister liked to say. There's significant things in here. What happens? When are we going to understand how bad this is? Because will this paper come back again?
This is why we're saying we want you to know that we will carry out this rapid review. And Councillor, and you all know why, we're not in a position where we can talk projects, but I don't think we should be talking project specific here anyway. But we will keep people informed. We will keep you informed as to where we're landing as we resolve that, and it'll take several months. But the most important ones we will look to resolve at pace and early, so we can keep going, whether not on that list of Eastern Busway and the electric trains and stabling. So we know that the implications of removing 600 million of funding, 1.2 billion of capital, will mean that some projects will stop. And we haven't decided what those ones are yet, and it would be unfair to say that I even know what they are, and some projects will be reduced in scope because unless, and we have not made this assumption, unless there is another funding source to make it up, we just don't have the money to do it. So things will need to change.
And last question, thanks, Chair. The government obviously won't allow us to use this funding for the electric charging infrastructure, and any delay to that, I imagine, is going to have a significant effect on, those boats are going to be new, ready to go, and I'm assuming there might be a case where there's nowhere to charge them. Because we've been promising communities for a number of years that these will be our new future fit boats with better access, but if there's any delay, I'm not super keen to go for a new tender process to a new investment company or something. What does that do?
So the electric, the landside charging infrastructure is on critical path. So that's why we've called it out in our report to say that would be an example where you've got a contractual commitment that cannot be funded by the regional fuel tax. that we will need to fund from another project. And that project will either be de-scoped or it'll be stopped. But that's the position we're in, and so we're up for making those hard calls. But that would be an example where the dilemma we have plays out, which is why I want you to understand how we will manage it.
Thank you. And this is not your fault. Thank you for answering our questions.
Just, Mark, I just wanted to reiterate a point that came in those questions that you said in respect of some of those projects that may or may not happen. You did say that the RFT funding for some of them is quite variable from, I think you think 10 to 50%, and that there are other things like the developer contributions caught up in that. So some of those projects, their RFT profile might be negligible in the overall scheme of things. That's correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Councillors Henderson, Lee, Newman, Bartley and Fletcher.
Thanks. I've got a number of questions. Thanks, Chair. And thank you for presenting. You guys didn't choose to remove the RFT, so there's plenty of frustration around the room, but I hope you sort of take it with the appropriate, levels, I suppose. Anyway, questions. So I've got on one of the slides here, Project 14, if I can just pull that one up. Land purchases related to Wainui and Red Hills housing developments. Those things are under contract but won't receive funding. Can you talk me through that decision and what the implications are? It's just on slide 12.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm not as close to the Red Hills one in terms of exactly what's committed there, but the Wainui one, that's the up near Silverdale, the Wainui development, the Milldale project. Okay. So council packaged together with, it's actually the one example we've used something like an IFF model where basically there's a new subdivision going in, or big extensive area. I think the homeowners, when they buy their house, they've got to pay a $1,000 targeted rate for, is it 20 or 30 years to help contribute to the cost of the subdevelopment. Council was under Matthew Walker's days, was quite keen helping pull this whole thing together through the sort of public-private partnership type model. But the critical thing was that AET, as part of it, made sure we still committed some money to building some of the connecting roads into it. Okay. So there's a contractual legal agreement that brings all the parties together, including council.
Okay, Red Hills is in my ward. I can imagine those all new residents will be pretty anxious to see this in front of them. So I'm just asking if you could maybe take that one offline and give me some advice as soon as we can that I can pass to the residents. That's one. Got a couple more, thanks, Chair. On a more fundamental level, we're talking a massive hole in our budget and public funds. Was there any consideration to having a workshop on this before getting here? Because we haven't had one. I don't know whether to see it. Yeah. Sorry, I'm not sure where to direct the question, Chair.
Well, we can maybe slide this one over to Barry. I mean, the obvious, the obvious thing to note is here, there's been a lot happening quickly and there's a lot of balls up in the air. So as far as definitive information goes, we're kind of trying to keep people informed as we go along. That's hence the extraordinary item today. But I'll maybe let Barry speak to that a little bit.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor. No, we didn't have a workshop planned for this, and the process, and I think Dean has outlined it around the work that they're doing to try and prioritise what's top of the list of projects rather than just looking at the funding source from the fuel tax. We could do something in the future, but I think we'd really need to hear from Auckland Transport as to what they would recommend and what their priority list is to make that worthwhile.
Yeah, I suppose thank you for that. Just on a broader level, I could rephrase the question into how are we going to be involved in the decision making? Because before, it would have been lovely to talk about this behind closed doors and really thrash it out. That might be some of the reasons why we're getting some big questions here. So what are we going to do about this in the future? That working together piece.
Yeah, look, let's talk that through with the council team. At this stage, we're saying if we live within the LTP and the budget constraints that you've set for us, then this is simply a reprioritisation exercise within that. And we need to make some decisions on balance that also honour commitment to strategic alignment and return, or BCR. If we have workshops on this, then we'll have to have a workshop on the impact of the GPS, and we haven't even talked about the GPS yet. And you've got an RLTP and LTP. So I worry that we'll workshop specifically details on regional fuel tax, and then we'll have to have another workshop on all these other things, and then we'll be back to the beginning again, because they've all actually got to come together, and they'll come together in the RLTP and the LTP. There are significant changes through the GPS. You know, we've got a 60% or 40% reduction in safety investment. So we know that we will have to reprioritise what we do and how we do it, and where responsibility lies even for DSI reduction, let alone public transport services or public transport infrastructure. So I think you've got a trusted agent called Auckland Transport's taking all of these moving parts and bringing that in the best we can to manage a somewhat unique circumstance.
I get that. I'm just reflecting on that I do think I'm not alone in feeling disempowered as a decision maker of the city. And I have expectations from my public on making those decisions. And I have to answer to them on the decisions that are made. So I'm just saying, I know it's quick, I know it's a dynamic situation, but we've just got to keep that in mind.
Sorry, Councillor, we're not looking to disempower anybody.
I'm not saying you're looking to.
And we've been gifted the situation the same way that you have.
Yeah.
We're working through it as honourably as we can. We're bringing you transparently how we're looking to address it, and we will continue to do that.
Cool, thanks. I've got a couple more. Thanks, Chair. Sorry, I've got a few. Sorry, thanks for your patience. In terms of the rapid review of the capital program, this is just another kind of, it goes back to what I was saying before. Just asking you to commit to keeping us up to date on this work and actually identify ways for us to exercise our decision-making ability on that. I know rapid is rapid, but I've got, ripped up bits of my ward that are, causing hazards, and people want answers. So I'm just, that's another thing as part of that heading. Probably not a real question. Lake road improvements and road seal extensions, are those two different things, or are they one thing? They're one thing in the bullet point.
Separate things, though. I think it was just squeezed in there to sort of replicate how the order in council was written, but it's to squeeze it on the slide, totally different.
Okay, do we have a quantum on the expected road seal extensions?
No, again, and this is sort of a bit of a, the order in council just specified these are the projects you could spend RFT on. It never specified a dollar value. Now we can do the sort of allocations behind the scenes, but there was no specific number allocated. The nuance they probably want to draw out is, and this reflects a part of the last change of the last RLTP, so the order in council was specific about seal extensions. We then, based on feedback from council, has changed it to an unsealed road program, which is broader, because we thought in some cases you get more bang for your buck if you actually do works on improving roads that aren't sealed. But what that would, and this is where it gets into the legality, we could, if we are doing seal extensions, still spend RFT on it, but probably not the broader improvements.
Thanks. My last question. Thank you, Chair. Under E, we've got a bit of a grab bag here of this will be a combination of X, Y, Z, etc. I don't know whether we're envisaging that we're going to make the decisions on that combination, but I'll just ask you, if you're looking at things like unsealed roads and you're looking at things like Lincoln Road that's fallen off, are we going to take into account population catchment when we're looking at what combination we're going to go with?
Apparently that's my question, Councillor.
Sorry.
Look, so I've allowed a moment of levity, aren't we? Will we look at population catchment? All of these are subject to a benefit cost ratio, and that will pick up population, that'll pick up existing level of service and asset condition, it'll pick up the outcomes, and we're also looking for strategic alignment, so we with broader outcomes. So yes, it will do inherently as part of that process, but it's not just a population-based exercise. That is one of the factors of many that will need to be considered. Thank you.
Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, gentlemen. I have 4 questions. The first relates to paused projects in light of the regional fuel tax discontinuation. Road improvements. You'll understand that AT plans to ban private vehicles from Wellesley Street west between Queen Street and Federal Street and make it a kind of a bus freeway. Is that one of the projects to be paused, not being in mid-flight?
All projects are going to be reviewed, councillor, against BCR and strategic outcomes. So if that project doesn't stack up, then we'll have a look at it. But if it's, and I know some about that, but if a project is critical in enabling, for example, City Rail Link, and there is a relationship between that, and we've got a few examples of it, then we would look to continue to prioritise it. So, look, I just think rather than specific projects, we've said let us work with the principals at this stage. So I don't have comment on specific projects.
Okay, you're not. Could you find out? That'd be good, because you obviously don't know. Can I ask another question then? It relates to it. What I'm concerned about with this scheme, which is totally non-legible in my view, it preserves the right of Sky Casino to use its car parks, and of course Auckland Council, Auckland House car parks, they're okay, but everyone else between Federal Street and Queen Street are likely to get pinged if they trespass into that area. I'm concerned about a news report in New Zealand Herald on the 17th of February that indicated that AT had levied $12 million worth of fines, I think in 16 months, for a part of Queen Street between Aotea Square and the Civic. And that scale of fining, it's 80,000 individual fines, 80,000 Aucklanders possibly, seems almost like a fine trap. And I am concerned that that will be extended up that part of Wellesley Street. I really would ask AT to reconsider the whole idea of this completely non-legible, and I can't see logical tax trap or fine trap between Aotea Square and the Civic. $12 million worth of fine seems completely exorbitant.
But this is not RFT related, Chair.
We'll just let the CEO.
I'm going to say it's not RFT related, it's a separate issue. I do know that it was reported in the media, I acknowledge that. I think we responded through the media at the time. If you require more information about the philosophy and the approach there, I'm happy to provide that, Councillor Lee. I just don't have it present with me today.
Can I ask another question?
On this item, Mike?
Well, it's related.
Okay.
If I may, can I?
Yes.
Thank you. Given AT middle management at least is very, very keen on banning cars from this part of Wellesley Street in favour of buses, it seems counterintuitive that the popular outer link service that travels along Wellesley Street, the bus stop, which was once very legible and convenient for people on the corner of Wellesley East and Queen Street, has been moved a couple of times, and now it's been moved so far up Wellesley Street that
Point of clarification, Councillor. We did have an AT update now before.
We don't have, as a point of order you're raising as to relevance, is it? Yeah,
I'm asking a question.
yeah.
Can I finish answering the question before I'm interrupted? Please.
Just, actually, but just to be clear, we had that, AT update, 6-monthly report, so if it's tied into the RFTs, certainly proceed. Otherwise, it's probably missed the boat as far as that in the previous item. But if it's RFT
That's not
related,
a point of
please do.
order. That's not a point of order. I'm asking a question. I've every right to ask a question of these people. What are they here for then? The next question. The next question is in regard to the, what is it? Charging stations, landside charging stations for electric ferries that AT is building for Fuller's. In terms of constructing these power substations on Queen's Wharf, will a resource consent be needed by AT before proceeding on this construction work?
Murray, are you across the status of consents? Consents are required. It'll be definitely building consent. Is a resource consent required? I'm not sure that it is. I think it's within the designation.
We'll follow usual processes.
Yeah.
So perhaps you could get back to Councillor Lee with the relevant information.
I'll confirm. Yeah, and the charging of the structure is not for any one particular company. It is owned and operated by Auckland Transport and owned and operated for ferries that we then lease to whatever the ferry company of the day is that's providing the service.
Thank you. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask questions in this chamber. Thank you.
Certainly, Councillor Lee. Councillor Newman is online.
Yes, good afternoon. This is Gone 12. Dean, the projects that ended up being included within the regional fuel tax, which I mean that was consulted on firstly as really as part of the ATAP, as I recall, and then the government, of course, subsequently agreed that and has made decisions by Order and Council. With respect to the Eastern Busway and the electric trains, I mean that's projects 4 and 6 on the list, I think. You're confident, you're absolutely confident that if we're endorsing this, then we can at least get stages 2 and 3 for the Eastern Busway done and the stabling work. You're confident that there is sufficient supply there within the residual of the RFT to be able to meet all of those costs if it's agreed to?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And you have, just to confirm, as I understand it, that if we were to not endorse it, the government has the ability and has always had the ability to intervene to redirect, that the funding will be allocated to meet the costs as per projects 4 and 6, correct?
The government can choose to do what the government will do. I couldn't comment on that, Councillor Newman. If you want to call the bluff and say you're not going to support with that portion of the RFT, then I guess the consequences or the outcome will be the outcome. But our clear advice from Auckland Transport, and I want to be on record for this, is that you allocate the funding to Eastern Busway, the electric trains, the stabling associated with those, and then the balance of the funding will be allocated in accordance with any change in legislation. If there is another decision by this chamber, that is a political decision.
All right, thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bartley?
Oh, thank you. Before the government put up these changes, wasn't the majority of the RFT going to go on the Eastern Busway anyway? Like a big chunk of it was going to go on Eastern Busway, right?
Correct. It was one of the key strategic projects getting funded.
Right, so we're just continuing with what we already agreed we were going to do. Right. I just wanted to pick up on the resolution that was on the screen. I know what we're hearing from the councillors for...
We just put the resolution up,
Oh, yeah.
sorry.
And what we're hearing from the councillors is not many people are using the buses. So I just needed an explanation of why for the additional bus services on the Eastern Busway.
Sorry, so your question, can I just make sure I heard it correctly? Sorry, councillor. Why the operating expenditure allocation and why we're ring fencing that or suggesting it?
Or just why there's additional bus services on the Eastern Busway when the councillors for that area are saying not many people are using the current bus services.
So I'd probably just think of it like CRL. So, sorry, first thing is Eastern Busway is not finished. We've only built one of the stages yet. It's not a complete product. If you think of the Northern Busway, it wasn't until the whole thing's built out that suddenly you've got that guaranteed journey time through all those stages that you'll expect to see that bigger uplift in patronage, because we've only built one out of 4 stages so far. The intent around the OPEX was you'd put on extra services when stages 2 and 3 are complete, so not now, because at the moment you probably don't need to do it. And so I'm giving you, the reason I'm mentioning CRO, it's the same thing, is it's the money that's required when CRL goes live. So you'd actually sit on it in your bank account for a couple of years until the CRL goes live and then spend it. Same with Eastern Busway.
Right, cool. Do you know the patronage or the usage of the Pemua train station? How high it is?
Sorry, we don't, but if that's of interest, we can find that information out for you.
Yeah, it's pretty high, and it's because a lot of people are coming over in their cars from the Botany, East Auckland, Howard area and parking
Correct.
at Pemua and then getting on the train. So there's potential there for people to switch. Now with the Northern Busway, was there low usage when that first started off and a lot of pushback?
It's a very good point. Once the Northern Busway investment was completed, it took off.
Went from 600,000 a year in 2008 to 8.5 million a year in 2019.
And we're seeing the same thing on the Northwestern as well. It'll exceed all our expectations in terms of patronage. So we're very clear. That is why we're recommending to you that investment continues. We're very clear on the benefit.
Thank you. I support your recommendations. I think while I respect what other councillors around the table say, I ask that people not be short-sighted about the Eastern Busway. Even though, I'm not going to benefit from it myself. I don't live in that area. I live next door to it, but I can see the benefits of bringing that option to that part of the city. So, thank you.
Councillor Fletcher?
No, my question has been asked and answered to Councillor Bartley. But I do note that in a lot of the questions that we're traversing today, as a council, we're a creature of statute. And I want to acknowledge that the officers are trying to give us as much clarity and guidance as they can in the tumultuous world of politics. And I guess from my perspective, the whole of this has been a maze for many years now, and I really applaud the work that is being undertaken in terms of advocacy to central government on getting greater autonomy to Auckland to determine its own future, and secondly, just getting the integrated transport plan off the ground, because that will give us the leverage to go back to central government to try and get the legislative changes that we're going to need in order that Auckland can deliver, the type of future that we want. But I do applaud our officers and Auckland Transport and the board for trying to help us navigate our way through changing times.
Okay.
I'm happy to move if I'm the last. The recommendations.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Final 2 questions from Councillor Walker and Williamson.
Just a very quick question, Mr. Chair. At the last meeting, I asked for a report back on the status of the electric ferries that are being built. don't think we've received anything. Just wonder what Dean's comment is around that, because you did say that you'd be able to do that, Dean.
If I haven't done something I said that I would do, I apologise, and I'll have another go at it. And we'll also bring you, you asked us another question just around ferry charging infrastructure, so I'll talk to the team and we'll get something as a memo, and other councillors might also be interested in it.
And Councillor Williamson?
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I've just got a bit of a procedural question about the changes to these recommendations, given that nearly all of them, I think, except D are just noting they don't really have a lot, because I'm confident that there's such a change coming with a GPS and so on that nearly everything we're discussing here today is sort of up in the air. But can you just tell me, where did those changes in red come from? Are they from you, Mr. Chairman?
The changes in red come as Chair's recommendations as a consequence of discussing this with the relevant officers to in turn try and make the statements as clear and as accurate as possible. So basically we've had a set of recommendations from a variety of parts of the council, but all saying the same thing, but this essentially just looking to say those things more clearly and more fully.
Okay, I just was, I mean, because they're noting, I'm going to let them pass. It's just that the moment you put things like, as in C, as well as operational expenditure for additional bus services on Eastern Busway and additional train services utilising new trains along the Eastern and so on, then you are immediately taking away some of the pressure to spend this money on CapEx like Glenvar and like Lake Road. But look, I'm quite comfortable with, I just want to know where they'd come from, because they were quite a surprise when I saw my notes last night. They weren't in there, and then this morning those extra changes are there. But as D's the only one that's making a decision, that's the endorsement one, I'll live with it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Williamson, and good point. And I just wanted to check, Dean, that the reference there that Councillor Williams had made to those additions was just in effect accurately reflecting what the enabling bill of the legislation allows, isn't it?
Correct. We support the changes that are there, and I acknowledge that a lot of this was moving at quite some pace to get resolutions up there that you might want to consider. So those are improvements to them. Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you, gentlemen. If you'd step back now, it's been moved by Councillor Fletcher, seconded by Councillor Darby. We have received an amendment from Councillor Ferry that we've put over to the officers just to check the validity in terms of the other recommendations and how it might impact upon them. So perhaps rather than me try and explain it, I'll maybe hand over to Barry. So we're just clear on what may or may not be happening here. So I'll ask Barry to do that first.
Point of order, is that usual with amendments? I don't recall having had my amendments checked by, or noting other councillors having their amendments checked by officers for validity prior to being put up.
Well, we could just go to it, but what has happened in the past, if there's implications, particularly financial ones, or if there's contradictions, then I think people should know that. Otherwise, they're not going to know it. I mean, I'm happy to entertain the amendment, but if there's concerns there, I think the meeting should know them, shouldn't they? And you can then decide whether you think those concerns are valid or not.
I guess in the past, I'm not aware that we've had staff critique of amendments prior to debate. That's something we resolve through debate usually.
Well, I have said to you that has indeed happened in the past, where if it is deemed necessary by the chair, there is a comment by the staff without seeking to demean or negate the amendment, and that's simply what I'm asking them to do.
Oh, I look forward to that rigour being applied consistently. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments on the amendment. First is that staff haven't had a chance to fully actually assess the implications of the recommendation here. Some of those things that need consideration, what would this, if this, and we're talking here about completion of Eastern Busway stages 2 and 3 to be fully funded by central government, understanding what are the implications if the government says no to that. Does that actually stop the funding of a project that is currently under construction, and what are the risks associated with that? So there is some assessment and analysis that we would recommend is done around this to fully understand what the implications of it might be on a project that is currently live and under construction.
I'm sorry, can I just, sorry Chair, can I just question that advice briefly? I think the key word we're looking for here is seek. Seek is an advocacy word, right? So do we really need to worry about all of that with respect? This is an advocacy point for us. So
okay, so I think that's the nub of it. So and I think that's why we need to check that. So if it's a matter of just asking the government to stump up for the completion of the busway, then that may be okay. But there are potential other repercussions here for the other points. So
perhaps the issue is around if the project continues and has funding to allow that to continue while that SEEK process is underway, then there's not an issue. It's understanding what the implications might be if the government said no, and being clear that that would not stop progress and the construction that's currently underway on the project.
okay, so in terms of where that leaves us, then Barry, is that if we were to proceed with this amendment, then there would be some uncertainty as to the effect on the other parts of the project. Is that right?
I would need to be very clear that that the continuation of the construction works isn't contingent on seeking the central government funding.
Okay. So Councillor Ferry, in the spirit of cooperation here, I think I can see what you're doing. Would you countenance then an additional point that just asks the government for
I've got a wording suggestion, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, which would be and support the completion of the Eastern Busway stages 2 and 3 and seek to be fully funded by central government. So that is not, and I want to be clear about that, that is not endorsing the RFT money, but it's not endorsing it, if you see what I mean. It's remaining silent on the RFT money and saying we support the project and we want it to be fully funded by central government. That would be the purpose.
Okay, so Councillor Ferry's at liberty to put up her amendment. Has it been seconded? Oh, we're sorry. We've got.
You want the new wording?
We've got the motion that's been moved by Councillor Fletcher, seconded by myself.
Are you entertaining
Yeah. No, this is an amendment that we will vote on separately.
Sorry, can I just get some clarity? So you've given me some latitude here, which I appreciate. We've had the advice from Barry. I've made a suggestion of a slight reword to be clearer about the intent of the amendment. Are you accepting that slight reword to the amendment?
I'm taking that as a separate amendment.
So you're saying now there are two amendments?
No. Sorry, you're looking to add that on to the D? Yeah.
Yeah, so the D I've suggested is by way of replacement, so it would replace DI2 that we have at the moment, the whole of that. And what I'm suggesting, No, because that has, so this is why I rewrote D, because what it's saying is the intent,
So could you just send
new
through-
wording.
New wording through?
Yep.
We'll just take a break, if you don't mind, for a minute to
Sure.
allow that to come through and clarify matters and then go back and talk to it and vote on it. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Right, so just adjourn for 5 minutes to deal with it.